This interview of Felice Dimartino's near-death experience is one of the best examples of a black light experience I have encountered. With extraordinary clarity, she describes what it's like to be in that loving place and come out to meet a being of light. Welcome to the Afterlife Files, where we investigate near-death experiences, shared death experiences, and how they affect you. Unlike podcasts that are just stories, we will give you a heads up on what to look for in our conversation, and then after the interview, stick around. We'll help you make sense of those accounts so you can incorporate the insights into your life. I think you'll find that once having your most profound questions answered, living life in the physical is filled with more peace and joy. There are 6 things I'd like you to watch for during this interview. First, notice how the universe strengthens Felice's resiliency before subjecting her to an NDE. Second, at several points, Felice experiences bilocation, the ability for her consciousness to be in 2 places at once. Third, even though it was a horrific accident, she was assured by the voice that all is truly well. Fourth, how that voice has stayed with her in different forms since the accident. Fifth, the gifts from the being of light. And 6, a major learning for her is how to stop being small and live big. And I don't mean personality big, but big in the sense of being in alignment with her life's path. Lastly, be sure to stick around after the interview because I'll detail the elements of her black light experience, one of the most elaborated and complete I've ever run across. With all that, I know you can't wait to hear our interview with Felice Dimartino. Welcome, Felice. Boy, are we glad that you're here today.
Thank you. Likewise.
You have such an interesting story. So why don't we just start with that? So what led up to it and then dive in?
So a few years before the accident, I was in a period of my life I call resiliency boot camp. And a lot of things happened in a very short period of time. My then partner had an affair, so I was moving through infidelity. My second daughter left to go to college, so I became an empty nester. I fell skiing, and this has to do with identity, right? Like I was stripped away as a partner, as a mom, that changed. I was an avid skier and cyclist, and I had a surgery. My house had a fire. And then as if that wasn't enough. Oh, before the fire, there was a major theft of all my jewelry that I had owned and family heirlooms. Then came the fire. Then once the top floor was gutted and renovated, the bottom had a flood. So it was a series of events. Needless to say, I took a leave of absence from work. So
yeah, this is biblical proportions kind of stuff. Were there locusts? And
you think?
Wow.
Yeah. And I took a leave of absence from work to, I was like, really? Another thing and another thing? And I stopped saying this could be worse because I felt like I was broadcasting that and I didn't want to invite worse happen. Oh, really? Here you go. So that all happened in a period of about 15 to 18 months. And just as I got my sense of self back, I returned to work. I had done a lot of different kind of therapies and modalities. I was like in it, just navigating the past 18 months. And I was at work one day. I was a teacher in a Montessori school, and I was at work. And on December 2nd of 2015, I left work to walk to my car, which was parked off of campus at the school, near the school. And I was distracted by a conversation I had engaging with someone that I knew I shouldn't be engaging with. And I didn't listen to that inner voice. And I was put my phone away, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to do what's good for me. I've learned all of this up to this point. And I got to the corner, the light turned red. I waited for the right of way to cross, and I proceeded to cross the street. And about 3/4 of the way, as I was across the street, a big pickup truck came up from behind me and made a left-hand turn. It turns out she was trying to get ahead of the oncoming car, like make a left-hand turn before that car approached. And she made a left-hand turn and hit me and struck the right side of my body and propelled me 30 feet and in the air. And it turns out 2.5 car lengths from the crosswalk. So that's what happened in that situation.
And keep going. This is great.
So she hit me, and I have this vague remembrance of whipping my head around to the right, in reaction, although in the moment it seemed like time had stopped, and it was like in frames almost of this slow motion. And there was a brief moment of eye contact. And then I was above my body, and I was looking down at the scene as if with a bird's eye view. And there was like a spotlight almost that was focused on what was happening below, even though in my periphery, there was a sense of expansion. It was unlimited. And I was looking down, and there was a type of assessing that was going on of my body laying in the road. And it looked like a chalk drawing. And I remember here, first I was a little like jolted, right? I was a little disoriented, yet I wasn't, to give words to the feeling that I felt when I was out looking down. It was more like this like, whoa, adapting and adjusting. And then I had this sense of assessment, and I heard the woman who hit me say that she had called 911. And I saw, with this sense of vision that's other than how we perceive seeing, there were 3 people. There was a man that directed the other woman to go to the cross street that the woman had just came from to direct the cars. And so I was seeing this in a multi dimensional, like I was able to see and hear and feel the panic in a very detached kind of a way, with amplified senses and senses other than my eyes and ears, which was impossible because I was lying on the road looking to the left. And in assessing, it looked like my body was in one piece, and there was a wondering of if I would be able to go back to it. And I had a sense that I would be able to. There was a sense, it wasn't a knowing, there was a sense that it was like I could go back. And the next thing that happened is I was further up above, and it turned into complete blackness. And in the blackness, it felt like I was in a cocoon almost, floating. And it was calm, it was peaceful, it was nurturing, it was warm. And out of the periphery, I sensed that there were other beings, other people actually floating in their own cocoons, although I couldn't quite see it. I could barely make that out with my peripheral vision. And it was like a holding places of sorts. And it was blackness, but not like scary blackness. It was blackness that felt illuminated almost. If I can, again, I'm trying to give words to this as I practice giving words to something that's so hard to give words to. So there was this blackness that expanded and far off as and as far off as could be, and even further. And in that state of being, it was pure presence in a now moment. It was like all of time collapsed and expanded at the same time. And it was pure nothingness and pure everythingness almost, but more of a sense of like this spaciousness in a now moment. And I was in that place, and it just was like there was no attachment, there was no wanting, there was no yearning, there was just being. And out of that came a wondering. And we would attribute the word thought, but it was like energy that formed into a curiosity or into a wondering of, where am I? Is there more? And immediately, or not even is there more? Is there something else? Is this it? Is there something else? And as soon as those, again, that thought form made up of energy that was really like this emergence of this wondering came, I was in another place entirely in response to that wondering. And it was instant. And there was and I don't know whether I went there or whether it came to me or whether I emerged. There was an opening up of this pure white, like crystalline, clear, the purest of purest white light, I want to say, that was also clear at the same time. And this was coming from a presence that was other than my own, that I knew was there for me to communicate with me and with the part of me that was eternal. And in communion with this light, with this presence, it was as if it was as if you put your head to another person's forehead, and you can know and understand and see everything about who they are in totality and everything about their soul's journey. It was like that. And I was able to see and know and understand with senses that we don't have names for, with senses beyond these senses, these multidimensional senses, all in union as one thing. They weren't like separate senses. It just all worked together to know and understand everything that was happening on earth about my life at that moment in time. And I was able to see and understand and know kind of how I had gotten to this point, or something about my soul's imprint in having the experiences that I was having. And at some point, a lot of information went through. And at some point, there was a sense of urgency to get back to my body. And the urgency wasn't like mental thinking. It was like energy that kind of came up, that kind of culminated in this sense of going back, it was time to go back. And I remember assuring this presence that was in communion with the part of me that it was communicating with, that I would remember everything that was shared. And I also assured myself in that state that I would remember everything that was shared. And at some point, when I asked who this presence was, and it says, I am you. I am you. And I heard, before I came back, I heard from this presence, other than my own, that was in communion with that place in me. When you go back, it's time to live big. It's time to live big. And I came back into my body, but on the way, it felt like I was coming down, and it started to get more dense and more dense and more dense. And I was about, 6 inches to a foot outside of my body. And I could feel the expansion. And I could also feel it was like being sucked into a vacuum. It was like a genie being squeezed into a bottle, even though I was still outside of myself. And I remember hearing yelping sounds and screaming sounds from the body that was also identified as me, from me, yet I didn't feel anything. And I remember in my consciousness knowing and saying, oh, that's coming from my breathing form, like that's coming from me. And I was in the ambulance and I saw what was going on while I was in it. Like I could see clearly there was someone standing at my head. There was a man sitting at my head in the ambulance. And there was another gentleman aside, and he was squeezing my head. My head had lots of blood coming from it, and they didn't know where the blood was coming from. And he was standing at my head, and I saw it, yet I was in it too. And I remember hearing the sirens and saying in my consciousness, oh, those sirens are for me, just like that. And I was in and out. And I remember I was watching and also participating. Like they were asking me questions, and I saw my mouth moving and saying something, yet I was in both places. I was in all of it. And when I came more fully to, I was being taken out of the ambulance into the trauma unit of a hospital. And they took me to a different hospital that had a level 1 trauma unit. And it was organized chaos. And it was, And also one other thing that I remember, and it's been really helpful. I didn't know what this was called. I didn't know anything about it until I watched one of your podcasts. Was when
Glad I could help.
Thank you. When I was out of my body, I saw someone like up at my face asking me questions or or getting me to respond. They wanted to know if I was responsive. And I saw my mouth moving, and I remember hearing what I was saying, yet I was watching it all at the same time. So I never really knew about bilocation until I knew that I was, at one part, I was purely that, and I was completely motionless. And I didn't know that I was bleeding out from my pelvis, or that my sacrum was fractured, or that there was internal bleeding. Or that my head was bleeding. I had no idea from the vantage point I was at. I didn't know that. I just saw myself as a human in one piece. So that's what happened.
Oh dear. and wonderful, and all of that at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, there were other things that were imparted and other things that were said. I heard all is truly well, and that continued to come. I heard that after I got back. Like, there was still this connection of kind of being in a whole nother frequency, a whole nother vibration. And
so you're talking about when you were back, like in the hospital, you were in your physical body, but you were still connected and heard this and heard the voice.
The voice I continued to hear, and yeah.
And how long did you continue to hear that voice?
Well, Scott, it was really, 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 really strong for a good year or so after the incident. I had a broken pelvis, I had a fractured sacrum, I had staples in my head, I had internal bleeding of my organs, I had swelling. There was a lot going on physically. So I had a lot of time, and I had a traumatic brain injury, and there was a lot of time to sit and just be. I couldn't really do anything else, right? And So I would say about a year and a half, 2 years. And I still I'm able to go in and attune to and tap in and open up to connect in with that presence. It hasn't left.
And I'm assuming that it told you things other than all is well.
Yes. There's a lot in terms of understanding. There was an understanding in that when everything was being downloaded or uploaded or transmitted, there was an understanding of what is it that keeps us not coming from that truest, most highest place, that I am presence, that spark of divinity inside all of us. So why is it that we don't live big? So I was shown this in multiple ways, all working together. What keeps us from living big and playing small? What role does the ego have? What role does compassion and love and faith and acceptance and surrender and gratitude and boundaries have? So all of that was a part of it. There was a lot in there, and it was like at this time, there's no time there, right? So it was like there was so much information contained within whatever human time would attribute to it. There was like all this information is just like that, and you just know it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. We call that Gestalt. That it's just that you just, or Bob Monroe used to talk about thought balls. It's like boom, you get the whole concept just that quick.
Right. And for me, it was like, it's kind of like when you have an aha moment times a trillion, right? Because you understand it and you know it based on the essence of who you truly are, which is this spiritual, this soul, and this expression of the divine through us, right? And, it was interesting. I learned a lot of times people come back, like we had talked before this, and don't have boundaries. Whereas I learned about having boundaries because I didn't before. I think I just saw the divine in everyone. I saw the light in everyone, despite going through all this stuff. I was like, oh, related to people. Ram Dass has a saying that we are conditioned to treat people as who they're being, not as the essence of who they truly are. And I feel for some people, and I was one of them, I was treating people as the essence of who they truly are and not paying attention to who they were being, as if that wasn't spiritual, right? And it's a both and. You can acknowledge, it's both and. You acknowledge it and you pay attention.
So back to one of your insights, why do we live small? How do we get to be living bigger?
Well, first I want to say that living big doesn't mean like, right? It could be the simplest, seeming simple, acting in accordance and alignment with that inner knowing. And oftentimes we know it's good for us to eat. We know it's good for us who it's good for us to engage with. It's like, or we know we want to go take a walk and we don't, because the mind has a million and the ego has a million reasons why not to do that thing. So I say, anytime you do something that that's in alignment with your yes, that's living big, right? And we play small because, this is how we're biologically and physiologically wired for certain things. And when there's a perceived threat of abandonment, of not being safe, of being judged, because we want to have the sense of belonging, of not being loved, we don't live big. We act out of fear. And we end up playing small. So a lot of it has to do with fear. A lot of it has to do with the voice of the ego, which the ego is important, right? The ego is there for a reason. It has a role. It's not like, the ego is all bad. It keeps us safe and functioning as humans in the world. And it could also get in the way of what we know that we know that we know that we know, yet we don't pay attention. Does that make sense? I hope this makes sense.
And this voice was counseling on what we have to do to release what's holding us back.
Well, what it did is it showed me in my life what was going on in that moment, which is akin to the human experience that humans come in with, what exactly it is that keeps us playing small. And it's that fear. It's that fear that's oftentimes based in a story we make up or a legitimate trauma that we've had in our life. And we continue. It's like a habituated pattern. It's so complicated, right? Because it embeds itself into our nervous system. So it's really self-awareness, right? Like, self-awareness of when we are playing small instead of playing big. And it starts there. So yes, it gave me a lot of insights, and I'm now starting to formulate the words, integrating the experience and formulating the words to give to all of the knowings that were imparted.
I think that's important, that the knowings were imparted in something other than English. They were, it's an idea that you understood, not necessarily in the linear language kind of way.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yes, that. And it's like it wasn't even ideas, as it was like energy and remembering. It's like it's the remembering, right? We have this spiritual amnesia that we walk around in, right? I mean, you look at little kids are so connected because they're not mired and have all that stuff piled up on top of them that they then have to yet, right? So it's that return. It's like igniting the remembering. It was that, and like, oh, and understanding and bring attention to why we don't listen to our knowing, why we don't take the actions that we're drawn to take, why we have reasons and excuses for why we can't or shouldn't do the thing that we're being called to do. So it has to do with all of that. And I'm just now really practicing giving words to something that was imparted in a wordless way.
Mm-hmm. And that's difficult. You're doing great. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So what do you do? What is your method of remembering? Mm-hmm. How do you touch base again with that energy or with the voice?
So meditation is huge, right? Getting to a place of stillness. And, it's been a journey for me, just if I could, to be embodied, right? I tend to, like, it's easy to go out, coming back in and staying grounded, right? For me, I look to my body to give me information, which I've been guided to do from from someone we both know, right? And I've been guided to really pay attention to my body. What is my body telling me? And so there's that, and getting out of the analytical mind and into, it's like turning off the monkey mind, right? And being fully present and connected, and self-awareness also of the choice of making a choice to make a different choice in certain situations. For me, it's very easy for me personally to go in and be in meditation. And I think, it's building a muscle through these different practices to access and to be open to the voice, that voice that's outside of us, yet that's also connected, that it's not really outside of us. It's the voice of our inner knowing. It's like that presence was connected with my own inner knowing, with our own spark, with our own divinity, that place where we're all in union. So it's a practice to come back to that place. It's a practice of, it's self-awareness, right? And transformational experiences and transcendent experiences could give us glimpses of what that feels like. And then the work is how to bring that back in and be it and act it and walk and be from that knowing, right? I'm still getting those. It's a practice. It's a constant practice.
So what has happened to your life in community since you've had your NDE?
What I find is when I'm around people who have had these experiences, it's kind of like a coming home, and to be in community with others who understand the experiences in a way that words aren't needed has been very comforting for me, and kind of like a grounding point. And in coming back, I also know, the work and the service is to be able to share from this place to help guide people to access, to remember, to access the essence, to listen to that voice of the soul. And my communities, I have I have different communities, and I've learned to be okay.
Do your daughters, did they recognize you when you came back?
Yeah, I think actually what happened was when I came back, I have people that I could talk to about all of the things and entering to portals, and like so I have some people I could do that with. And for my daughters and my family, there's been such a love and acceptance and curiosity. And I feel, my dad passed in March, and it really, me having had this experience really helped my mom through it, and also really helped facilitating that journey for my dad in the knowing of what I experienced. And, what I do find is that the things that I was, and this happens to all people, I believe, as they go through their own spiritual awakening, and as we're raising the vibration and the consciousness on the planet, is things and relationships and energies. There are certain things I just can't tolerate, right? It's just, it doesn't work for me anymore.
So the voice that you communed with for a year, what would be another one of those lessons that you came out of that conversation with that was like, this is really a big deal?
Oh my gosh, I have journals upon journals upon journals of, because it happens at like 3 a.m. Now I wake up, I'm like, and I mean, literally journal. So I'm actually in the process of going through all of this information. And, I am putting myself in a state where I can channel information. And it's not necessarily from that specific presence. It's channeling from these vibrational frequencies. I know that could sound super out there. And I do believe that, and I know I'm going off on a tangent, I do believe that we all people have the capability to tap in, to listen. So there have been aha moments. I'm looking at I'm writing a book right now. So I have all of my key points right here, which is helpful for me with the brain injury too, because retaining information yet in word language. The other thing, that the experience of we are so much bigger than our bodies, and the experience of being in the both end of being spiritual beings having a human experience, being human beings having spiritual experiences, being spiritual beings having spiritual experiences, and being human beings having a human experience. We're all of those things right now, right? And I've been really guided to kind of integrate all of them while I'm here right now on this planet, because like I said, it's easier to go out. So one of the big things for me that I've been guided to is practicing. And this is not necessarily from that presence. It's a practice, practicing living and being from, I call it from the namaste, right? We say in meditation or in yoga, and many people have heard the expression namaste, the light in me honors the light in you, right? The light and the divinity in me sees and honors, acknowledges that in you. Imagine if we all walked around like that all the time. It would be a different world. And we can do that and practice that. Like practice that at the supermarket. Practice that at wherever it is and interacting with different people, we can return and practice that in each moment, right? Noticing, oh, I'm going into judgment again. Noticing self-awareness is the first step. And also acknowledging what is true. I mentioned before we spoke about spiritual bypassing, right? And toxic positivity. So one thing I learned about strongly when I was in all this stuff that led up to my accident and in coming back was, yes, I've had the ultimate of experiences in having this experience that confirmed in my knowing in the deepest place of me, that remembering, right? It's like now and embodied in every cell and particle in me. And life is hard sometimes, and things happen, and it doesn't feel like all is well always. Yes, in some cosmic level, all is well. But in the moment when you're moving through something difficult, that's very real for you. And we have to acknowledge that and not move around that, because that stuff gets lodged and stuck in the body and in our nervous system and affects us. And to not pretend that it doesn't exist. I think that's the danger. That can be, I don't want to say the danger, but we have to live in all of it. So I've had a lot of guidance through that.
And I think that's a wonderful place to wrap this up, that we have this ability to participate in the all there is, and we get to live here in the physical world all at the same time. And that balance becomes the dance, becomes the challenge, becomes the art of living. Oh, that was beautifully said. So thank you, Felice. Before we go, please tell people how they can get a hold of you and find out about your work. So my website is www.groundedillumination.com. And I have a bit about my story there and the work that I do. Groundedillumination.com. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Felice. This has been just a wonderful interview. For those of you that are watching, stay tuned because we have part 2 coming up. How about that black light experience? Remarkable, right? And why do I say that? Well, just to be clear, these are my viewpoints, but that's why you watch the Afterlife Files, to gain perspective by using more than one lens with which to view this rich information. There are 4 elements of a black light experience. They are color, feeling, presence, and contradictions. The color, that's easy. It was black. But the feeling of the blackness is important. It was calm and peaceful. Felice felt held as if in a cocoon. Other black light experiencers in describing this often use this gesture to convey what it feels like. This feeling was further supplemented with the words warm and nurturing. Then there is presence. This is so hard to talk about that she went at it twice. First off, she said, quote, "It was a pure presence in a now moment." And then she went back at it again later and said, "There was no attachment. There was no wanting. There was no yearning. There was just being." This is huge. And Felice gets credit for putting words to the experience of being one with the black light, being one with the I am nature of God, of not having a sense of self separate from the oneness of the universe. Then out of that blackness came an energy that coalesced into a wondering and then finally a question. Is there more? The moment she could form the idea of a question, there was a separation from the one. Then it was possible to experience more. And in her case, that was a being of light. And finally, did you notice the contradictions? This is a particular signature of the black light. Felice was held in a place of darkness, yet it was illuminated. Felice was closely held, yet the space expanded off as far as could be and even further. All time collapsed and expanded at the same time. It was pure nothingness and pure everythingness. This is an extraordinary description of the black light. Other near-death experiencers have called this place Source, where all things exist in potential. It is where all things physical are birthed. These same near-death experiencers describe the black light as the womb of God. Isn't that beautiful? Also interesting is how normally she described by location. It seems to be a natural state of near-death experience. She expanded on this by saying that we don't learn how to connect with our higher selves, but rather the natural thing to do is to remember. It's a reminder that we existed before we had a body, and we will continue to exist after our physical body is worn out and cast aside. Lastly, I have been struck how people who've experienced a near-death experience come away with an expanded sense of boundaries or, say, a looser set of filters. Felice learned the opposite, how to gain boundaries. I liked her summing up her interview with the idea that we can be connected to expanded states of consciousness while at the same time having good boundaries while in the physical. Like so much else in our physical lives, it's a balancing act. Thank you, Felice. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and comment. You can find the Afterlife Files on all podcast streaming apps: Apple, Google, Spotify, Audible, the lot. Pay us a visit at neardeathmeditations.com for information on our albums, workshops, and retreat. So now, please join us for the second part of Felice's interview with two shared death experiences. Thanks for joining us at the Afterlife Files. Bye now.